Welcome back to How to Craft Fair. This is episode 18 in the How to Become a Craft Fair Vendor series. And today I'm going to show you tips on how to talk to your fellow vendors at a craft fair. So, generally, there's not a lot of downside with talking to vendors at a show as long as you're not taking away from opportunities to connect with your customers. Remember that craft fairs are a community event, and it's going to provide you with a lot of opportunities to connect with your peers and get something more than just the potential financial gain that a craft fair can bring you. Okay, so it's not always about just the numbers. Think about all the other ways that you can benefit from the show, including connecting with your fellow vendors. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to start this off with a couple of basics. One of the benefits of connecting with your fellow vendors is that you do have a chance to reduce the chance of experiencing theft and shoplifting at your booth. So, when you're friendly with your fellow vendors, one of the things that you can do is tell each other, hey, I kind of got your back, and, I'll keep an eye on your booth if my booth is quiet and things like that. And, when there's customers at one booth and not the other, that's an opportunity to kind of help each other out and just, keep an eye on the situation. So this is always a really nice thing about connecting with your fellow vendors and your neighboring vendors, especially the ones closest to you. And it's a good idea to just kind of have each other's back. Okay, so another really nice benefit of being on good terms with your neighboring vendors is that you can help each other give a restroom break to the other if possible. So if you don't have a helper for the day and, neither of you has a helper, it gets tricky when you're by yourself and you don't want to leave your booth, but sometimes, you really, really have to. Either you have to use the restroom or, you need to grab a bite to eat or something. So it's always nice to connect with your next door neighbor and use that time to step away from your booth when you have to. Now, one thing I should say is that you should never abuse this, okay? So don't say that you're going to go to the restroom and you take a half an hour because you stopped to talk to 5 other vendors on the way back. Okay. So just be considerate of this and treat the other vendor the way that you'd want to be treated. And it's going to work out great. So this is, again, another really basic benefit of connecting with that next door neighbor. Okay. So now that we got a couple of basics out of the way, let's talk about some examples that aren't quite as popular or talked about that are still very, very important as far as connecting with your neighboring vendors. Now, one thing is to encourage one another. Craft fairs can be really difficult and challenging sometimes, and they're always very, very demanding emotionally, physically, mentally. So it's always nice to encourage one another. Positive vibes go a really long way, especially at craft fairs, because customers pick up on these things. Shoppers can definitely pick up on the vibe of the room. And if a lot of vendors are kind of sulking or in a bad mood or they're not talking to one another, they can read this, and it can turn them off as well. So like I said, good vibes, they really go a long way. And when you lift each other up as vendors, it can make an impact on those customers as well. So, just be there for your fellow vendor and pick them up if you see them kind of down or whatever, and hopefully they'll do the same for you. Now, I want to touch on a point that I just made as far as how demanding craft fairs can be. That's physically, mentally, emotionally. They are very, very taxing, okay? And sometimes it can be easy to just be inside yourself and worried about how much stress and pressure and effort you've exerted to get to that point where, the craft fair is underway. So sometimes, it can just really take the life out of you. And when it's showtime and it's time to go and interact with the shoppers, you might not quite have it anymore. You might not quite have that spunk and zest that you intended to have. So this, again, is another reason why you want to think about your fellow vendors, because odds are there's dozens of other, maybe even hundreds of other vendors who are in that same state. They prepared for so long for this day, and it finally got here, and there was so much buildup and preparation that went into this that they're kind of tired too. So I guess what I'm saying is that you're not alone, and if you're feeling kind of down or drained, I guarantee you that you're not the only one. So take some consolation that, it is okay to recognize those feelings, but do your very best to battle through it, and like I said, encourage one another, hype each other up a little bit. Like even if your neighbor like gets like a really big sale or something, just congratulate them or whatever and just be excited for them because it doesn't take long for like craft fair karma to come around, and a lot of times like you get what you put into it, and that's across the board. I mean, effort, energy, enthusiasm, all of that. So if all of the vendors at an event are positive and enthusiastic, it's going to pay off. It really is. And like I said, it does affect the shoppers, not only how many of them stick around at an event, because let's face it, it's not a lot of fun to talk to somebody who's down in the dumps or, kind of like inside themselves and whatnot. But on the flip side, when you're walking around a place and everybody's kind of like having a good time and, they're there that day to give it their best shot. And it really does take it makes an effect and it has an effect on those shoppers. It really does, how long they're going to stick around at the show and how much they spend. So keep all of this in mind that this good energy, it really does matter. Okay, now the next thing that you should consider doing with your fellow vendor is to draw inspiration from each other. Take a look at each other's signage, their business cards, their displays. These are some examples of things that you can learn from one another. Now, you never want to blatantly, steal somebody's like product idea or things like that, but there's booth attributes that you can definitely learn about from one another. Maybe even talk to each other about it, be open about it. So sometimes vendors are a little bit more guarded with, hey, don't, look at my stuff or and things like that. But I really wish it wasn't like that. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of times people are just getting like ideas and inspiration and, they might see something that they like, but a lot of times I don't think that they're going to just outright copy something. So be open to collaborating on inspiration basically, and don't be afraid to compliment each other and things like that. And again, this kind of just goes hand in hand with passing along those good vibes. I'd much rather see a bunch of vendors like saying like, hey, I like your signs or your display is really cool, as opposed to just kind of like looking at one another and not talking. That's another one of those weird vibes and weird energy that can kind of throw a kink into the show. So again, draw inspiration from one another. Never outright copy somebody, but yeah, collaborate on what makes a booth look good. Now, I think this next tip is probably one of the more rewarding aspects of craft fairs, especially, something that I've seen happen many a times, and that's the potential for lifelong friendships. It's not uncommon for crafters and artists and makers to connect at an event and establish some sort of lifelong friendship. Put some good vibes out there, and you never know like what could happen with some kind of a connection with a person that you get along with. So often at craft fairs, I think we go into them thinking about the numbers, the goals that you set, maybe the expected attendance, how much inventory did you make? Did you bring enough stock? Like we're always worrying about these facts and figures and things like that, but you can't forget about the things that you can't put a price on, those priceless opportunities. And they're there, so just be open to them and embrace the opportunity if you get the chance to, connect with a fellow vendor who could, become your friend one day or something like that. Okay, so another thing that you should definitely be open to is networking partnerships. So when you attend a craft fair, you're probably going to be participating with dozens or hundreds of other vendors. And a lot of times they have, maybe similar goals or similar mindsets. And it's always good to be open to these networking partnerships, especially in this day and age when there's social media and things like that, where it's very easy to connect with people on social media. And now you can even create content together while being apart. So you don't even have to be like in the same room together or something like that. And you can still collaborate on content, or you can collaborate on, designing a particular item or whatever. The possibilities are really endless, but you have to go into a craft fair ready to not only connect with those shoppers, because that's of course, the main goal, but think about how connecting with a vendor who's like-minded as you, and where that could potentially lead, just the opportunities that might open up for you. Maybe they have some great referrals that you don't know about, or maybe you have some for them about organizers that put together a really good show or events or things like that. There's so many different ways that you can build professional relationships with people, and just be open to this when you participate in shows, because I guarantee you that in one way or another, the opportunity is going to come. And, if you're excited about something like that, just be ready for it. And even you yourself, if that's something that you seek, put it out there and you might be surprised the responses that you get from people. So, like I said, craft fairs are just a really great way to not only connect with, the shoppers and things like that, but you can really build up some great professional working relationships with a lot of people. Okay, now finally, the last tip is to always practice good vendor etiquette. So you always want to put the shoppers first, okay? So if you're talking to your fellow neighbor and it's quiet at both of your booths, cool, that's great. But if somebody walks into either one of your booths, not just yours, then you got to, cut off the conversation and put the attention on the shopper, okay? Because at the end of the day, that's what your priority should be at the event. You also want to try to read the room as far as how much your neighboring vendor wants to talk during the event, okay? Some people, they're cool with talking a lot. Some people really don't want to talk, much at all. So, in that instance, introduce yourself in the morning, be friendly and things like that, kind of like the things that we talked about already in the video. But then just, leave it be. And like I said, play off of their body language and what you think the vibe is as far as how much they want to communicate throughout the day. But even if you have a vendor next to you that is okay with chatting, you don't want to do it for 8 hours, okay? You don't want to get so carried away that, you forget why you're at the event and things like that. So just try to find that balance. There definitely is a happy medium, and it's going to depend on the vendor and on the event, how crowded it is, things like that. So there's definitely some variables involved. So with how much you should be talking to fellow vendors, this is something that you're going to have to gauge at every event, because it's always going to fluctuate from person to person and show to show. But for additional tips on vendor etiquette, I definitely encourage you to check out this video up here. I have it tagged, and it is all about craft fair vendor etiquette. Okay, so we've kind of talked about communication with fellow vendors in this video, but as far as etiquette goes, I think that's a great video on just really the basics of how to conduct yourself as a vendor at a craft fair, all the do's and don'ts that you really need to know. Again, this was episode number 18 in the How to Become a Craft Fair Vendor series. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. And if you want to check out all the other videos in the How to Become a Craft Fair Vendor playlist, click on this right here, and that'll take you to it. Have yourself a wonderful day.